I call the Honourable Member Chris Okenvol.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the first reading of this bill, I voted that it be sent to Select Committee to ensure a call for submissions and a platform for discussion, and I am very glad that I did that. Serving on the committee as Deputy Chairman was instructive, illuminating and educative, and it was a pleasure working with the Honourable Ruth Dyson as Chair. I wish now to speak to the considerations of the committee. The one aspect that was universal, common to all submitters, was that marriage is special, precious and desirable. Everyone said so, no matter which part of the argument they were interested in. The issue is over who can or can't participate in it. Submitters were very definite in expressing their particular views. I found there were three main groupings, and I'd like to talk about them now. One grouping has an eschatological view of the bill. In other words, to pass the bill will be the beginning of the end of society as we know it. This was a very firmly held view. It's perceived as a slippery slope leading to our ultimate demise as a nation and as a civilization. I have no reason to doubt the sincerity of submitters who hold to this view. It was sincerity, though, Mr Speaker, that seemed to be entirely based on apprehension and fear and circular reasoning rather than on a persuasive argument. While, if the bill passes, I cannot imagine that a particularly large percentage of the population will suddenly take the opportunity to engage in same-gender marriages, I also cannot imagine that any number would make one iota of difference to the 41 years of marriage that my wife and I have enjoyed, or to anybody else's heterosexual marriage. I can't see it. I've thought deeply about this and cannot believe the social impact of the bill would herald the demise and collapse of the wider societal values in New Zealand. I respect the right of those who wish to hold to that view, Mr Speaker, but I cannot give it currency in coming to a defined position on this bill. Another grouping held a perception that this is counter to religious views and practices and represents a state interference in religious practice, beliefs and dogma. The committee listened very carefully and sincerely to the concerns expressed. As someone who had 5 years as a lay minister for the Presbyterian Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and was a member of the Council of Assembly for the Presbyterian Church, I had a particular interest in this aspect of the discussion. It became clear through listening that the overriding concern is that the clergy and those authorised by religious bodies to conduct marriages would be obliged, indeed forced, to conduct ceremonies for same-gender couples should the bill be passed. Mr Speaker, we've already heard from Honourable Ruth Dyson about Section 29 of the Marriage Act, which has always stipulated that it authorises but does not oblige any marriage celebrant to solemnise a marriage to which the licence relates. The Select Committee has recommended a new clause that makes it abundantly clear ministers of religion or celebrants from approved organisations are not obliged to solemnise a marriage if to do so would contravene the religious beliefs of the religious body or approved organisations. I thoroughly enjoy theological discussion and have a huge appetite for it. I've been most grateful for the opportunity to sit with clergy from many different denominations and engage with them on this issue. By providing and ensuring that this bill deals only with secular issues, I'll say it again, it deals only with secular issues, it nevertheless leaves a dilemma for established religious groups who wish to differentiate their church or holy matrimony from the new definition if the bill passes. It is not for the state to have a view on this. It's for the churches to resolve in their own way and time, and I look forward to engaging in that discussion in a personal capacity in my own time. The third consideration, we've heard it spoken by my colleague and friend Tim McIndoe this evening, is that marriage is an institution, time-honoured, never-changing, and having the essential components of one man, one woman, common to all countries and civilisations throughout the millennia until death do them part. Mr Speaker, it ain't necessarily so. I'm privileged to have my wife in the gallery tonight. My wife and I married on the 11th of March, 41 years ago last Monday. and lived happily ever after. But the question that exercised the upper echelons of ecclesiastic minds in those days was whether or not the bride should take a vow of obedience to her husband. You're marrying a red-headed West Coast girl from West Coast aristocratic family, some hope. During that same time, to have had children born out of wedlock was a hamper to church marriage, as was a divorce, or indeed wanting to marry someone of a different religion. Bans of marriage were called from pulpits, advising that people were intending marriage, and others were invited to give reasons why that marriage should not proceed or to forever hold their peace. Marriage, Mr. Speaker, is not an unchanging institution, and while most of its institutional aspects have been laudable for men, they have often been less than favourable for women. Some stats to show this change to the institution are quite illuminating, Mr. Speaker. 23% of marriages are conducted in a registry office. 32% of marriages are conducted in a church. 45% are conducted by independent marriage celebrants. Mr. Speaker, the figures shout out change, which we cannot close our ears to. I found it personally significant that from the, wait for the figures, 9,347 independent marriage celebrants, that's nearly 10,000 independent marriage celebrants, and 535 civil union celebrants, that's 1,500 altogether, the Select Committee received two submissions. Mr. Speaker, the last two aspects I wish to touch on are the matter of conscience and the question of family coming first. In terms of conscience, I've given much thought to this. I'm acquainted with guilt. Being a Presbyterian, one goes through life thinking that one hasn't worked hard enough, hasn't done enough, and hasn't reached the requirement that life's opportunities offer, and you always get other members who'll tell you that, as one did this evening. To assuage my conscience on this issue, I delve back in my life to the age of understanding, which I think those of Catholic persuasion tells me that Jesuits determined it's at 7 years old when I was a boy. I looked at catechismic values when I'm learning the catechism by rote in Glasgow. Who made you? God made me. Why did God make you? God made me to know him and love him. The third question, what image did God make you in? The answer, God made me in his own image. Mr. Speaker, every 7-year-old boy and girl said the same and believed it was true. They didn't have to add, as long as I conform to being heterosexual and not to loving anyone of the same gender as myself. My conscience is very clear on this issue. Every person has the same spiritual claim as one another to being made in the image of God, and it will be a braver person than I am to deny that. I've addressed the question of eschatology in my mind, the question of ensuring religious freedom, and the assumption of benign institutionalization. My conscience is not clouded or indeed involved in this issue. Mr. Speaker, as an older person, we do have a baggage to carry of remembering when homosexuality was illegal, and in fact it was criminal, and it was, we were told, immoral. There were two definite groups of people who came and made submissions before us, and it was what I would call a generational divide. And so, in dealing with the legacy of discriminatory prejudice, and I wouldn't want that to be a deciding feature, I prayerfully asked to be able to internalize and resolve this complicated situation in my head, in my heart, and in my soul. What I learned from listening to the submissions, Mr. Speaker, colleagues, is that in fact, each homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender person appearing before us was not just to be seen as an individual, not just identified by gender preference, but in fact as a mother's son or a daughter and a father's daughter or son, their siblings to their brothers and sisters, grandchildren to their grandparents, nephews and nieces to their uncles and aunts to their nephews and nieces, cousins to their cousins. Mr. Speaker, they're all family, along with their heterosexual friends and relations, and all are an integral part of the New Zealand family, all part in my mind, in my heart, and in my conscience, all part of God's family. I now realise that this bill seeks to put first something that critics have accused it of undermining, and that is the family. We as parliamentarians should not simply look past the interests of the applicants for this bill. We should not simply look at their interests. We should and we must look after their interests. We should pass this bill.
I call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Thank you.